Jay-Z testified that one reason he stayed silent so long was because he thought speaking out would destroy everything he'd built. But then I realized my silence was already costing me. Not in money, but before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated on the latest celebrity news and courtroom revelations. Your support helps us bring you more exclusive content like this. Before we begin, viewer discretion is strongly advised. The following is for educational and entertainment purposes only. This is the verbatim federal courtroom testimony of the EDE Sean Diddy Combs trial, as reported by Inner City Press. Nobody expected Jay-Z. The room was tense. Eyes focused on the prosecution's next witness until the back doors opened and in walked Sean Carter, known to the world as Jay-Z. Gasps echoed. Even the judge froze. No announcement, no pre-written statement, just Jay-Z stepping forward on his own. Until that moment, he had stayed silent as his name swirled through headlines, court leaks, and whispered connections to the case against his former friend and business associate. But something had changed. Maybe it was the mounting evidence. Maybe it was the betrayal from people he once considered family in the industry. Maybe it was hearing about the victims who had already come forward. Whatever it was, Jay-Z was done. Watching from the sidelines. He wasn't there as a celebrity. He was there as a man who'd seen too much and said too little for too long. And when he began to speak, the courtroom wasn't prepared for what they would hear. Because what Jay-Z revealed about Diddy, the parties, the business dealings, and the threats wasn't just explosive. It was a warning. It started like any other day of the Diddy trial. The room buzzed with low conversations. The press hunched in their designated rows, and lawyers whispered strategies as they waited for the prosecution's scheduled witness, Aledi Chudis, former bodyguard who had worked for Combs Entertainment. But when the side doors opened and Jay-Z stepped into the courtroom alone, no entourage, no legal team, no announcement, the room changed. You could hear a pin drop. Some people thought it was a mistake. Others thought it was a stunt. But the way Jay-Z walked, slow, deliberate, with that trademark confidence now mixed with something heavier, told everyone this was real. The judge raised an eyebrow, and Diddy, who'd been leaning back in his chair whispering to his attorneys, suddenly sat bolt upright, his face draining of color. In that moment, the power dynamic visibly shifted. Jay-Z walked straight to the witness stand. No eye contact with anyone. He didn't even glance at Diddy. "I wasn't subpoenaed to be here today," Jay-Z began. "I requested to speak after reviewing certain evidence that has come to light." The judge allowed it. And from that moment on, the entire trial shifted, because what Jay-Z was about to say wasn't part of any media narrative. It wasn't a social media leak. It was something that had haunted him for years. Something that began with a partnership that the world had watched rise and fall, but never truly understood why. "I've kept a lot inside for a long time," he said. "I've built businesses. I've sold millions of records. I've become a family man. But none of that can hide what I saw, what I experienced, and who made it happen." He turned just slightly toward Diddy. "You did." Jay-Z told the courtroom that it started, like many music industry stories do, with an invitation. It came through a mutual connection, someone they'd both worked with in the early days. The way they framed it, it was supposed to be a celebration of their success, a private gathering for the elite of the hip-hop world. Nothing wild, just music, networking, a place where artists could connect away from the public eye. He'd been to industry events before, so he didn't question it. But the moment Jay-Z arrived, he knew something was off. It was at a massive estate in the Hamptons. Black SUVs lined the circular driveway. Security personnel were strategically positioned throughout the property. The second he stepped inside, his phone was taken. That should have been the first red flag. They said it was for privacy, to protect the guests from leaks to the press. But it felt like something else, like they didn't want anything getting out. He was ushered inside. The lights were dim, the music curated to create a specific atmosphere. Not the tracks they promoted to the public, but something more hypnotic, more controlling. There were mirrors everywhere. It felt like someone was always watching. Jay-Z said that after a few drinks and some casual conversation with other artists, Diddy approached him directly. He said something like, "Now you're really in the circle." And he smiled. That smile, it wasn't warmth. It was ownership. Jay-Z said he followed Diddy into a back room, thinking they were going to discuss a potential joint venture they'd been talking about for months. Instead, what he saw shook him to the core. There were people in compromising positions. Some he recognized from the music industry. Some looked young, too young to be in that environment. There were others watching like it was entertainment. And Diddy? He was laughing like it was the most normal thing in the world. He paused, swallowing hard. I didn't know how to leave, and that was the point. Once you're in, you're in. Jay-Z continued, his voice steady but hollow. A few days after the party, he got a call. Blocked number. All the voice said was, "Hope you enjoyed yourself. You're one of us now." Then they hung up. He thought it was just a strange power play until an envelope arrived at his office. It was unmarked. Inside was a USB drive. I almost didn't look, but I did. It was footage from that night of me sitting on a couch, looking intoxicated. I don't remember being that impaired, but there I was laughing at things I couldn't even recall. There was a voice behind the camera, Diddy's voice, saying, "That's how we keep the family close." Jay-Z testified that the fear he felt in that moment was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. I realized I wasn't invited to that party. I was initiated. He said, that's when the manipulation began. I'd get invites to more events. I declined. Then suddenly, radio stations wouldn't play my tracks. People I worked with for years stopped returning calls. Rumors started online that I was disloyal, that I was difficult to work with, that I was losing my touch. I knew what it was. It was pressure. Diddy didn't need to say it. He just made it clear that silence was the cost of peace. And so for years, Jay-Z said nothing. He smiled through industry events, brushed off rumors, focused on building his own empire. But every time I saw a news story about someone else speaking out, all these brave people coming forward now, I thought, if they're speaking, why am I still quiet? He looked around the courtroom. Diddy didn't just damage careers. He made people fear telling the truth. And that, Jay-Z said, was what finally brought me to court. Jay-Z paused, glanced at the jury, and leaned closer to the mic. It wasn't just the video. That was the leash. He said from that moment on, everything he did felt like it had strings attached to it. He explained that calls would come through his management, invitations to collaborate, to appear at events, to invest in projects. When he said no, things would shift behind the scenes. I'd say no to a Diddy event, and the next week I'd find out a distribution deal suddenly fell through. No explanation, just gone. He said this didn't happen once or twice. It became a pattern. Diddy didn't have to threaten people directly. He had systems that did it for him. PR people, record executives, venue owners, streaming platforms. He knew who to call. He knew how to make problems appear out of thin air and how to make opportunities vanish just as fast. Jay-Z testified about one specific instance in 2008 when he had been lined up for a major international tour. We were in final negotiations, venues booked, promotion ready to launch. Then, out of nowhere, the promoter pulled out. I never got a straight answer, but 2 weeks later, I was invited to another Diddy event. When I declined again, the phone calls started. Blogs posting stories about me that were oddly specific, stuff only someone with connections could have planted. He said it was psychological warfare. You start to feel like you're paranoid, like you're imagining things, but then you see the patterns, the punishments. You realize you're not crazy. You're being boxed in. Jay-Z told the court he knew other artists going through similar things. Some of them are staying silent right now. Some of them have contracts that effectively silence them. Some of them are scared they'll be exposed the same way. Then he turned toward Diddy and said plainly, "You didn't just collect people. You controlled them." And everyone knew exactly what he meant. Jay-Z didn't stop at the manipulation. He explained how Diddy's grip wasn't just over artists. It stretched into the music industry's entire foundation. You couldn't walk into a major label without brushing shoulders with someone he influenced. You couldn't book certain venues, couldn't get certain press, couldn't access certain producers unless you were family. Jay-Z said he once attended an industry gala in 2012 where behind the scenes, high-powered figures from music, film, and tech were all deferring to Diddy, as if he was the power broker holding everything together. I watched one executive from a streaming platform hand him a folder and whisper, "It's handled like you asked." Jay-Z didn't say what was in the folder, but he said it confirmed what he'd feared. Diddy wasn't just networking, he was gatekeeping. He described moments where he saw other artists, producers, and industry figures behave oddly submissive around Diddy, like they were trying to stay in his good graces, laughing too hard, agreeing too quickly, deferring to him in every conversation. I realized a lot of people weren't his friends. They were his hostages. In integrity. He said the turning point wasn't fear, it was disgust. I realized that if I didn't speak now, my silence would become my legacy, and I couldn't live with that. My wife, my children, they're going to see these headlines. I had to be someone they could respect, he told the court. He contacted the prosecution team himself. I told them, "I'm ready. Whatever you need to know, I'll tell you." He looked at the jury. I wasn't just manipulated. I was made complicit through my silence. I was recorded, and I was used as a pawn in someone else's game. Then he looked at Diddy again, this time with a sharper tone. "And you knew exactly what you were doing." Jay-Z closed his eyes for a moment before speaking again, as if preparing to relive something he had fought to forget. When the prosecution asked if I knew about the recordings, I said no at first, he said slowly. But then they showed me evidence, text messages between Diddy and his team discussing the J footage and how to use it if needed. He described discovering the extent of the surveillance. It wasn't just me. They had material on dozens of artists, executives, even people from outside the industry. Politicians, athletes, anyone who could be useful. Jay-Z's voice cracked. For the first time. He looked down, collecting himself, then continued, "I never consented to being recorded. I never agreed to be part of that system. But Diddy recorded everything. He kept it. Not just to use, but to own people." Jay-Z's voice dropped to a quieter, deeper tone. "I stayed quiet for nearly 20 years. I convinced myself it wasn't happening, or that it wasn't as bad as it seemed. But then the evidence started to surface. He said the first time he heard about the recordings being submitted to the court, he didn't believe the extent of it. Then I got a call. Not from my lawyers, from someone I used to trust. They said, "Jay, they have footage of you from the Hampton house. They played part of it yesterday behind closed doors. People are talking." He described feeling like the floor had dropped from under him. I didn't even know how extensive the recordings were. But once I accepted what was happening, everything else started to connect. Jay-Z said he spent days reviewing his entire history with Diddy, replaying memories. The party, the subsequent threats, the career obstacles, the industry whispers. It was all connected, and I was just one piece in the machine. He said the breaking point wasn't fear, it was responsibility. I realized that if I didn't speak now, other people would continue to be hurt. My kids are going to see these headlines. The artists who look up to me would see my silence. I had to speak, he told the court. He reached out to investigators himself. I told them, I'm ready. Whatever you need, whatever questions you have, I'll answer them. He looked at the jury. I wasn't just a bystander. I became a victim, who then victimized others through my silence. I was recorded, and I was used. Then he looked at Diddy again, this time with resolve in his voice. And you knew exactly what you were doing to all of us. For his final statement, the judge allowed Jay-Z to speak directly to Diddy. He stood from the witness chair, walked a few feet closer, and looked him in the eye. You built an empire out of fear, he began. You called it success. You called it family. You called it love. But all you built was a prison. Diddy didn't respond. He sat there motionless, his lawyer whispering in his ear. Jay-Z didn't blink. I saw what you did to those young artists. I saw what you did to me. I heard the things you said about me when you thought I wasn't listening. You broke people for entertainment. Then Jay-Z pulled something from his pocket. An old photo. This was me in 2001, right before I first met you. That's the man I used to be. He held it up to the court. I've spent years trying to find him again. Jay-Z turned to the jury. If you think this is just about parties or me, or one night in some mansion, you're not seeing the whole picture. This is about a network of power designed to silence truth. And if we don't tear it down, it will keep going. Then he faced Diddy one last time. You once said, "Can't nobody hold me down." Well, nobody believes your lies either. He walked back to the stand, picked up his things, and exited the courtroom without looking back. And Diddy? He sat there pale, unblinking, his fingers gripping the table so hard his knuckles turned white. Because for the first time in decades, he wasn't the one controlling the room. When Jay-Z stepped down from the witness stand, he didn't look like a man who had won anything. He looked like someone who had finally removed a heavy burden. The courtroom was still tense, almost unsure how to breathe again. Even the judge looked shaken. Some of the jurors had tears in their eyes. And Diddy, for the first time in the entire trial, looked like he had nothing left to say. Jay-Z didn't speak to the press when he exited. He didn't wave, didn't posture. He walked out the front of the courthouse with his head held high, but his shoulders carried the weight of 2 decades of complicit silence. When asked later by reporters if he felt relieved, he reportedly responded, "Relief isn't the word. This is just the beginning of the truth." But outside the courtroom, the world was only beginning to react. The music industry went into a quiet panic. Label executives called emergency meetings. Talent agencies paused deals. Artists and producers who had once celebrated their connection to Diddy were now issuing carefully worded statements expressing shock and distance. Behind closed doors, crisis teams were activated. PR firms sent internal memos urging clients to review any past associations with Combs Entertainment. And while many tried to pretend they were shocked, the internet was already doing what it does best, resurfacing the receipts. Old clips of Diddy, with various artists where tension was visible beneath the smiles, interviews where guests carefully avoided certain topics, footage of Jay-Z years ago visibly stiffening when Diddy's name came up in conversation, and most painfully, dozens of young artists whose careers mysteriously stalled after being initially connected to Diddy's labels and projects. Fans weren't just shocked, they were furious. Furious that someone like Jay-Z had to carry this burden alone. Furious that for years the whispers were dismissed as conspiracy. And furious that the system had stayed quiet for so long. But Jay-Z didn't disappear after his testimony. The day after court, he released a single statement online, a black-and-white photo of the Brooklyn neighborhood where he grew up with the caption, "Truth is heavy. Carry it anyway." No hashtags, no name drops, just that. The response was immediate. Millions of shares, thousands of comments, celebrities, activists, and everyday people thanking him for his courage. More than anything, other artists began coming forward with their own stories. "You gave us a voice," one wrote. "If Jay can speak, so can we." Meanwhile, back inside the court, Diddy's team scrambled. Rumors swirled that more subpoenas were going out, not just to artists and assistants, but to executives at major labels, distribution companies, even media conglomerates. What Jay-Z's testimony had done wasn't just personal. It had cracked the foundation. And now the flood was coming. Whispers said more recordings existed, not just audio, but visual footage, some of them featuring other major industry figures. The court sealed these for now, but according to insiders, if any of them leak, it would reshape the entire music industry overnight. And Jay-Z, he didn't return to business as usual right away. He declined interviews. He canceled appearances, but he wasn't hiding. Sources close to him said he was spending time with his family, focusing on healing and supporting others coming forward. One friend told Billboard, anonymously, "He's finding his voice again for the first time in years. He's not just a businessman anymore. He's a leader." Before court adjourned that day, the judge made a statement that caught even the media off guard. What we heard today was not just testimony. It was a reckoning, and this court acknowledges the courage it took to deliver it. The final image of the day wasn't of Diddy. It wasn't even of Jay-Z. It was of the jury sitting motionless, processing everything they'd just heard. And in that silence, one thing was clear. The era of silence was over. Thank you for reading this exclusive report. If you found this informative, don't forget to like and subscribe for more breaking news and in-depth coverage of the ongoing trial. Your support allows us to continue bringing you the stories that matter.